I am Amelia, 34. It's a story of me and my husband and one stranger. The sun always found its way into our bedroom before I woke, as if it had been invited. Golden light slipped through the curtains, soft and warm, settling over the rumpled blankets and the curve of his shoulder. I'd lie there, still and quiet, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. His breathing had its own rhythm, steady, comforting, like the low hum of a lullaby. Sometimes I'd reach out just to trace the outline of his jaw with my fingertip, memorizing the texture of his skin. When his eyes finally opened, they landed on me with that familiar spark. "You're staring again," he'd tease, his voice thick with sleep. I'd laugh, brushing it off, but inside, I knew it was true. I was obsessed with him, with us, with the small cocoon of safety we'd built together. Back then, these mornings were my proof that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had no idea how fragile that feeling really was. It wasn't a grand moment that brought us together. No cinematic twist of fate, just a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. I was late for work, hair pulled into a messy bun, when I saw him in line ahead of me. He wore a navy sweater that looked too warm for the weather, and I remember thinking he had kind eyes. When the cashier mixed up our drinks, he handed me mine with a small smile. "Maybe fate wanted us to switch," he joked. I didn't think much of it then, but 2 weeks later, we ran into each other again at a bookstore. This time, he asked for my number. From that day on, it felt as if we were magnets pulled together no matter where we went. Our first dates were simple: walks through the park, late night drives with the windows down, hours talking in diners. He made me laugh without trying, and I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd stumbled into something rare. Our first apartment was barely big enough for the two of us. The kitchen could only fit one person at a time, and the bathroom door stuck when it rained, but it was ours. We painted the walls a warm cream, filled the shelves with books and mismatched mugs, and argued over where to put the couch. He hung picture frames crookedly. I killed 3 plants in 1 month, and still, it felt perfect. We made traditions without even realizing it: pancakes on Sunday mornings, music playing while we cooked dinner, dancing barefoot in the living room. The place was far from perfect, but it was a canvas we painted together. I thought that as long as we had each other, we could make any space feel like home. Fridays belonged to us. No matter what the week had been like, we'd come home, order takeout, and collapse on the couch. We'd watch our favorite shows, eating straight from the containers, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes we'd fall asleep halfway through an episode, limbs tangled under the blanket. It was our ritual, a promise without words. I clung to those nights because they reminded me of who we were: 2 people who loved being in each other's company more than anything else. I didn't know then that promises could be broken so quietly you'd never hear the sound. I've always been the trusting type. Maybe it's because I grew up watching my parents stay together through every hardship, believing that love was enough to keep 2 people bound. I wanted that same kind of forever. With him, trust came easily. He remembered the smallest details: how I liked my tea, the exact playlist I put on when I couldn't sleep. He made me feel seen in ways I didn't think were possible. I built my world around that feeling, never imagining that the same man could make me feel completely invisible. He had a way with people. My friends adored him. My family welcomed him instantly. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a dozen new friends. His laugh was easy, his stories engaging, and his attention made people feel special. I used to watch him at gatherings, surrounded by laughter, and think how lucky I was. I thought his charm was a gift, something that made our life brighter. I didn't realize it could also be a tool, a way to hide in plain sight. It began with things so small I could have ignored them. A late night at work here, a missed call there. He'd explain it away with a smile, and I'd believe him because I wanted to. Love, after all, is built on trust, but shadows grow if you don't shine a light on them. I noticed him hesitating before answering simple questions, a faint scent on his shirt that wasn't mine, moments when he seemed far away even while sitting right beside me. I told myself I was overthinking. I painted over the cracks without seeing how deep they went. The first jolt came from a name I hadn't seen in years, a casual acquaintance sending me a message. "I think you should know something about your husband." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering above the reply button. My first instinct was suspicion, not toward him, but toward her. Why would she say that? What would she gain from hurting me? People lie. People stir trouble. I locked my phone and told myself to forget it. But her words lingered like a splinter. This time, the voice was closer, a friend of a friend, speaking carefully. I don't want to get involved, but I think he's seeing someone. I laughed when she said it. The sound felt hollow even to me, but I clung to the absurdity of the idea. My husband? The man who brought me flowers on Tuesdays, who rubbed my shoulders when I was stressed? No, impossible. And yet, something inside me shifted. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't unknow it. That night, I lay in bed while he scrolled through his phone, the soft glow lighting his face. His fingers moved quickly, his expression unreadable. When I shifted under the covers, pretending to turn in my sleep, he immediately locked the screen and slid the phone under his pillow. It was such a small action, yet it landed in my chest like a stone. I stared into the darkness, my body still, my mind racing. For the first time, I felt the faint sting of fear, not fear of losing him, but fear that I had never really had him at all. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. People get busy. People get distracted. It didn't have to mean anything sinister. But my mind, once open to the possibility, started noticing every tiny irregularity. He didn't just come home late. He came home different. His smile seemed practiced. His eyes darted away too quickly. I began watching him more closely. I told myself I was being silly, but I couldn't unsee the patterns. Every detail became something to catalog. The time he walked through the door, the scent he carried, the clothes he chose on certain days. My heart told me to trust him, but my gut was starting to whisper otherwise. It was late past midnight when I woke to the faint light beside me. His back was turned, his body curved protectively around his phone. His fingers moved quickly, stopping every so often as if he were waiting for a reply. The tension in his shoulders was visible even in the dim light. I shifted, making the mattress dip slightly, and watched as he immediately locked the screen and tucked the phone under his pillow. Go back to sleep, he murmured, not turning around. I closed my eyes, pretending to do just that, but sleep was impossible. Something was unfolding right next to me, and I was no longer part of it. He began working late more often, always with a plausible explanation. I never accused him outright. Instead, I nodded, smiled, and asked if he'd eaten. I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of the supportive wife while privately counting the hours he was away. Sometimes he came home smelling faintly of a different cologne, not the one I had bought for him last Christmas. He claimed it was from a co-worker who'd hugged him goodbye. I wanted to believe him, but my mind replayed the inconsistencies like a broken record. The storylines weren't adding up anymore. One afternoon, on a whim I couldn't explain, I drove past his office. I told myself it was coincidence, but the truth was I wanted to see for myself where he was. His car wasn't in the lot. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where it should have been, my stomach sinking. I didn't follow him that day. I wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, I went home and forced myself into routine, cooking dinner, folding laundry, acting as though nothing was out of place. But in my mind, I marked that day as the moment instinct began to outweigh trust. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. I was out running errands when I turned a corner and saw him. He was standing on the sidewalk, smiling, really smiling in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. And beside him was a woman, tall, confident, with hair that caught the sunlight like a flame. They stood close, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. He laughed at something she said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, the same way they used to when he looked at me. The sight hit me like ice water. My body went still, my fingers gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I watched them in a kind of trance, the world around me blurring into nothing. They walked together toward a calf, his hand lingering on the small of her back as he held the door for her. It was an intimate gesture, one I knew too well. My heart didn't race. It felt like it stopped entirely. There was no outburst, no tears, just a heavy, crushing weight pressing down on my chest. I stayed parked, staring through the windshield, as though the glass between us could protect me from what I was seeing. That night, he came home smiling, telling me about his meeting and asking if I wanted to order takeout. He looked me in the eyes as he spoke, and I smiled back, my voice steady even as my insides burned. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I played my part perfectly, setting the table, asking about his day, listening to his rehearsed answers. But inside, something had shifted. The man sitting across from me was no longer my husband, he was my opponent. Lying in bed beside him, I made my choice. I could confront him and let the emotions spill out, or I could be patient, silent, calculating. If I was going to face the truth, I wanted it on my terms. For the first time, I began to see him not as the man I loved, but as a puzzle I needed to solve. I would wait. I would watch. I would gather every piece until the picture was undeniable. I started taking mental notes of everything: when he left the house, when he returned, the exact times his late nights happened. I noticed which shirts he wore on those days, which cologne lingered on him when he came back. Even his phone habits became part of my research. How quickly he locked it when I walked by. How his thumbs sometimes moved faster, as if the words he was typing were urgent. The details became my arsenal. Even if I didn't yet know how I'd use them, curiosity led me to check our shared credit card statements. At first, nothing seemed unusual until I saw small charges at restaurants I'd never been to, boutique stores I'd never heard of. They weren't large amounts, but they stood out to me like flashing lights. Each one became a breadcrumb, a clue leading me towards something bigger. I began writing them down in a notebook I hid deep in the back of my closet, alongside the dates, the lies, and the growing certainty that my marriage was not what it seemed. Her face haunted me. Even without a name, I could recall every detail: the shape of her smile, the way her hair framed her face, the tilt of her head when she looked at him. I knew that in today's world, a face was enough to find someone. It took hours of careful scrolling through social media connections, following hints and tagged photos, until I finally found her. Her profile was pristine, perfectly curated snapshots of a life she wanted the world to envy. And there he was, not in any photo directly, but in the background of her world. I recognized the restaurant booths, the street corners. The puzzle pieces began to click. Her name was elegant, fitting the polished image she projected. She was the type of woman he had once told me didn't interest him to put together. Too high maintenance, too polished for his taste. That lie now seemed almost laughable. She tagged locations often, and I began comparing them to the credit card charges in my notebook. They matched more times than coincidence would allow. She wasn't just a shadow in my marriage, she was living in the spaces I thought belonged to me. I created her new best friend, or so she thought. A fake online persona, someone friendly and harmless. I used stock photos of a smiling woman with a cat, built a believable backstory, and slowly began following her posts. I liked her pictures, commented just enough to be noticed, and waited for her to accept me into her carefully filtered world. The access was immediate. She shared more than she realized: locations, times, moods. With every post, she gave me more of the map I was building. While I studied her, I began working on him. I pulled back in small ways: less laughter, less touch, less attention. When he asked what was wrong, I'd shrug and say, just tired. I let my phone light up with messages while he was in the room, sometimes smiling faintly before locking the screen. I left a hint of cologne in the hallway, one that wasn't his. I mentioned a name he didn't recognize in casual conversation, then quickly changed the subject. I wanted him to wonder, to feel the unease I'd been living with. With her, I was more subtle. I commented on one of her photos of a restaurant, writing, I was just there last week with my guy, such a great place. I posted vague statuses on my fake account about a married man who couldn't stop lying, never naming names. I wanted her to feel the smallest ripple of suspicion, to look at him differently, to wonder if she was the only one. Doubt is like smoke, it seeps in quietly until you can't breathe without tasting it. At home, the air between us shifted. He noticed my silences, the way I sometimes left the room when he entered. I started running errands at odd hours, returning without explanation. He asked once, everything okay? And I smiled sweetly, saying, of course. The truth was, every step I took away from him was deliberate. I wanted him to sense me slipping, but not enough to confront me. I wanted him to start chasing shadows. It happened one evening when he walked through the door and found me humming to myself in the kitchen. He stood there longer than usual, just watching me, his brow furrowed slightly. He asked who I'd been texting earlier. I laughed it off, but the question told me what I needed to know. He was wondering. The confidence he had carried so easily before was starting to fray at the edges. He was glancing at me differently now, like he was trying to read a language he no longer understood. I told him I was going to visit my sister for the weekend. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and wished me a safe drive. In reality, I stayed in the city. I parked across the street from his apartment building and waited. Hours later, I saw him emerge, dressed casually, looking relaxed in a way he hadn't around me for months. She joined him, her hand slipping into his like it belonged there. They laughed as they walked into a bar, and I pressed record on my phone, capturing every moment. They were comfortable to be new. I filmed them walking hand in hand, leaning close over drinks, his arm draped around her shoulders as they left. When they kissed at the curb before getting into his car, I caught every frame. The footage sat in my phone like a loaded gun. I could have shown him that night, but I didn't. Timing was everything, and I was going to make sure my shot landed perfectly. While I planned my strike, I also planned my escape. I opened a separate bank account in my name only, slowly transferring money. I gathered every important document, our mortgage papers, my identification, his credit card statements, and stored them in a safe place he didn't know about. I contacted a lawyer, not to take action yet, but to know my rights. Every step was careful, deliberate. If I was going to burn the bridge, I wanted to make sure I was already on the other side. It was time to test the waters. I chose a picture of him sitting on our couch, smiling at me from across the living room. It looked intimate because it was, and that was exactly the point. From an anonymous account, I sent it to her with just one line. Do you know where he is right now? Because it's not with you. Then I put my phone down, feeling the rush of the first true move in my endgame. The changes were immediate. That night, he came home distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. His responses to my questions were short, almost clipped. He drank 2 glasses of whiskey before bed, something he rarely did on a weeknight. I sat beside him on the couch, pretending to watch TV, while secretly savoring the shift. The man who had once been so sure of himself now looked unsettled. Her social media activity shifted too. Posts became less frequent, captions more vague. The once perfectly curated feed now showed signs of hesitation. She stopped tagging certain locations, and I noticed she no longer posted photos of herself smiling as widely. Doubt had begun to take root, and I knew it wouldn't take much more to make it grow. He started pacing the house more often, answering phone calls in another room. When I asked if everything was all right, he'd force a smile and say he was just tired, but I caught the tension in his jaw, the restless tapping of his fingers on the counter. He was unraveling, and I hadn't even played my biggest card yet. I met with my lawyer again. We reviewed the division of assets, the process for changing locks, and the legal steps to ensure my financial safety. I left the office with a folder full of documents and the knowledge that when I left, there would be no loose ends. That night, I quietly packed a suitcase with a few essentials and stored it in the trunk of my car. Just knowing it was there gave me a strange sense of calm. It was time. From another anonymous account, I sent her the full video, the one I had taken of them together that weekend. Every touch, every kiss, every look between them was there in crystal clarity. I didn't need to add commentary. The truth was loud enough on its own. Then I turned off my phone and went about my evening as if nothing had happened. That night, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He stepped outside multiple times, his voice low but urgent. I could hear the sharp edge in his tone even through the closed door. By the time he came back inside, his face was pale, his eyes hollow. He poured himself another drink and didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. I knew she had confronted him. I knew he was losing control. The next evening, he came home looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His shirt was untucked, his tie half loosened, his hair disheveled. He dropped his bag on the floor and sank into the chair without a word. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't need to. This was the look of a man who had been fighting all day and losing every battle. I waited until after dinner, then walked into the living room carrying a neat stack of papers. I set them on the table in front of him and stepped back. He looked down and saw everything: credit card statements, screenshots, photographs, the video. His face shifted from confusion to shock, then to guilt. He didn't even try to touch the papers. His hands stayed still on his knees, as if moving them would make the evidence more real. I know everything, I said quietly. I've known for a long time. And I stayed not because I was blind, but because I wanted you to feel what I felt. The moment the ground disappears under your feet, he opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Don't bother. Every word out of your mouth will be a lie, and I'm done listening to lies. I told him the accounts were separated, the house arrangements finalized, the locks scheduled to be changed in the morning. I spoke with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed every word. He sat there in silence as I laid out the final Details. By tomorrow morning, I told him, your key won't work in the front door. Your things will be packed. Your accounts are separate from mine now. You'll leave with what you came with, nothing more. His shoulders slumped as though each sentence was another brick placed on his back. I didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't cry. My calmness was the sharpest weapon I had left, and I watched it cut deeper than anger ever could. When I was done with the logistics, I leaned forward, my voice soft but steady. I also made sure she knows who you really are. Not just your friends, your colleagues, your family. Every person who thought you were a good man now knows the truth. His eyes widened. That was the wound he hadn't anticipated. He could survive losing me. He thought I'd disappear quietly. But losing his reputation? That was a scar he'd carry forever. I stood up, leaving the papers where they lay. He didn't move to stop me. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. I could hear him shifting in the living room, his breaths uneven, but I didn't care to see his face again. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. By morning, he was gone. His clothes, his shoes, even the toothbrush from the bathroom gone. The silence he left behind was different this time. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was clean. I stood in the middle of the living room, coffee in hand, and realized I wasn't sad. The absence felt like a blessing. The texts started coming in later that day. Friends asking if it was true, offering support, expressing shock. Some admitted they'd always felt something was off about him but never wanted to say anything. Each message reminded me that I wasn't alone in this, that the life I'd thought I'd lost was only just beginning to take shape again. This time without his shadow over it. I checked her social media once, out of curiosity. Her profile had gone private, her posts wiped clean of anything personal. It was as if she'd vanished from his life completely. I didn't feel satisfaction so much as closure. Whatever lies he'd told her, they'd crumbled under the weight of the truth. She was no longer my concern. I started noticing little things: how I could cook whatever I wanted without worrying about his preferences, how I could read in bed without him complaining about the light. The house began to feel like mine again, not ours. One evening, I played music loudly while I cooked, dancing around the kitchen with no one to judge me. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't even realized was missing. Revenge didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't magically heal the wound he left behind, but it gave me back something. I thought I'd lost control. I had been powerless for months, living in the dark. But now the light was mine to turn on and off as I pleased. Some nights, I thought about the moment I first saw them together. I realized now that the pain had been the start of my freedom. One afternoon, I changed the locks as planned. The sound of the new mechanism clicking into place was oddly satisfying. I closed the door slowly, my hand lingering on the handle for just a moment before letting go. It wasn't just a door closing on him, it was closing on the chapter of my life where I doubted myself, where I accepted less than I deserved. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, the air cool against my skin. My steps felt lighter than they had in years. There was no grand plan for what came next, no desperate rush to fill the space he'd left. I was in no hurry. For the first time in a long time, I was walking forward on my own terms, and every step was mine.